Welcome, students. Today we are going to be talking about tarot, one of my favorite things in the world. And since I began working with tarot and reading tarot in my own life, probably about 10 years ago, it's become something that I really enjoy. I like thinking about it. I like working with the cards. I like doing readings for other people when possible. I engage in a practice I call solitaire, where I just sit down, I put down 5 cards, think about them, then put down another 5 cards, work through the deck. I tend to not read professionally, though I have before, which is nice. I like the money. What I really like to do is I just like to go places and sit out and read tarot. Often I'll just go to like a bar and I'll sit and I'll be kind of working tarot and people come up and ask if I'd read for them. And I say yes. And then I do think it makes more sense when there's some sort of an exchange. So I'll like have them buy me a beer or something. And that's really a fun way to read when I don't know people at all and kind of learn more about the cards and learn about people and meet people. It's a practice I quite enjoy, which is interesting because I was raised as a fundamentalist evangelical Christian, as I've told y'all. And, tarot was evil and eternally bad, stretching back throughout time as an evil way of using cards. And we're going to see that cartomancy, telling the future with tarot, really only dates back to about the middle of the 20th century. And then before then, even a real like esoteric sort of occult or wisdom oriented secret wisdom tradition of tarot doesn't really even get established until the late 19th century, the 1800s. Okay, so let's get started. All right, tarot is a relatively recent divination system that claims it has this kind of crazy like ancient pedigree, that it comes back from the lore of ancient Europe and ancient Greece and whatnot. But in fact, it is derived from a playing card game. One of the oldest decks we have is the Marseille French deck, though probably the Italian ones that we have some records of are older. And this was a playing card game. These days, there's a wide range of decks. I have just a couple just like right here that I'll hold up at different times. And these decks are all based on really a deck that came out of an organization called the Golden Dawn that inspired the Thoth deck, which is the deck I use primarily, or the Rider-Waite deck, which I don't have right here. I have it over in the other place. The Rider-Waite deck is very, very prominent, but so is this Thoth deck. It gets used quite a bit as well around. I see it a lot. Anyway, so some forms, we have those forms that I just told you about were created in the 20th century. We do have some forms that are derived from the Marseille deck, which was reconstructed by Alejandro Jodorowsky and a man named Camoin in the 1990s. And that's trying to get back to kind of one of the oldest French decks we have. But the oldest, absolute oldest trace, 1500s at the absolute earliest. So really what's going on with tarot as a divination system and as an occult system for magic and for linking together secret knowledge is really found in the 20th century. Now, Rider-Waite, for the most part, and also the Thoth deck, as I said, are the ones we see the most in pop culture. If you see tarot on a TV show, it's going to usually be the Rider-Waite, maybe the Thoth sometimes. Okay, so the forms of tarot continually change. So I just said that the tarot is really popular, but there are all sorts of other ones that come up. Like this one, a guy swore to me at an occult bookstore, this Tarot of the Moon Garden is the greatest tarot system. And when I told him that I used the Thoth, he was like, oh, it's too dangerous. We'll talk more about why that is. And we have this very unlikely cat tarot, which if you like cats, it's actually kind of a fun deck. The art's really pretty. This is the New Wave Tarot, which I bet a lot of you might not be into new wave music, but look, I've got a microphone instead of swords. I have a lot of band references to, the sort of stuff that I like, this post-punk stuff from the late 70s through the mid 80s. So that's the New Wave Tarot cards. I mean, I doubt that somebody's going to use the Kitty Cat Tarot to kind of tell the future. Or will they use the Zombie Tarot? This is a great one. It's actually supposed to look like it's a box of bullets. And then on the inside, you get this beautiful artwork. It's just lovely. Right here, I'll just show you. Just lovely. It's all zombies. The undead are victorious. The lovers. Zombie lovers. So yeah, that's a really cool deck that I like. But a lot of these more whimsical decks don't really have sort of the, I would say, potency. I don't think they have as much sort of cultural relevance. They use the same symbolism for the most part, but it's couched in so many like sort of innovative tongue-in-cheek methods and imagery that I just don't think it does all that much for you. Now, postmodern practitioners of magic or chaos magicians, who we'll be talking about later, would say that the form and these images of these decks don't matter. The only thing that matters is, can you use them to gain insights or learn about secrets or tell the future? That would be the only thing. So so I talked about, there's the Thoth deck up at the top, and the bottom is the Rider Waite. You can see that the Thoth deck is just, it's a little bit more vibrant. The imagery is prettier. It's a little less blocky. I find the imagery much more pleasant. And that would be the Egyptian god Thoth right there, even though it was derived by Aleister Crowley, not the Egyptian god Thoth. So when you're using tarot for divination, I've talked about this a little bit before. There are readers who, and this is the type of reader I am, I only read the symbols of the card in relationship to the question or to my client, to the person who's asking it. I'll draw upon my experience, like with the cards and seeing how the cards interact, meditating about the cards, doing different readings with the cards, talking with other people, reading for diverse audiences. But it's really about the cards and reacting to the person that you're reading for. Others sort of psychically look at the card, and then like a crazy image comes in their head, or maybe a pleasant image, who knows? And they intuit those images or meanings. Then they relate those images or meanings that they are inspired by to the person who's asking them a question in a somewhat meaningful manner. This is generally the way that sort of the angel tarot cards that aren't really related to tarot, or there's a whole other version of cartomancy or division or divination or lore based on and derived from cards that are called vision cards. And in those, they're not even connected to tarot imagery. They're just cards with really striking images, and they're supposed to, cause you to be inspired to have visions. Now, like I said, divination with cards is called cartomancy, and we see no evidence of it in Europe until the 19th century. We just don't find it beforehand. So it is only widespreadly used, as we encounter often today, in the tarot card readers that are on every street side in every big city and even kind of small town. We only see that in the later part of the 20th century. Now, these decks are usually marketed with little books, like I've got one right here. Here's one of the little book that came along with this Thoth deck, or my new wave tarot has an interpretation kind of like, it's all over the place, but that'll tell you how to kind of explain stuff, and it connects it to different band names and whatnot. It's kind of fun. Anyway, so they have these little books, right? So they are ostensibly to interpret the meaning. The booklets are basic, usually giving you sort of like a vague interpretation of the symbols and having like a one-to-one interpretation. Like, if you see this, then you'll meet a tall and dark stranger. So the difference between, say, these little books, I would like to say, and sort of a larger book like, say, this, here's Crowley's original Book of Thoth that a friend of mine gave me a few years back, or the difference between looking in this little book and saying, oh, when this happens, it means this, is sort of like the difference that Freud describes in interpreting dreams. There were books of oniromancy, which some of you have written about, divination due to dreams, would say, when this dream symbol happens, then this will happen to you. Freud looked at those and said, those don't actually teach us about dreams and what dreams are doing. And he set forth a method of psychoanalysis, analyzing the soul using dreams. In that sense, looking at one of these little books to read the tarot cards is the equivalent of just looking up what a symbol means in a manual of dreams, as opposed to talking to someone and realizing what is at the heart, what is at the wish, what is at the bottom, what is at the navel of the dream. Crowley, in fact, described, Aleister Crowley, the cards as having relationships. So how do you learn the cards? It's kind of like you go to a party and you watch people interact. You watch how the cards interact together when you put them out, when you read for people, or just as you see the symbols playing off one another. So the meaning of the card dawns upon you as you watch the way the cards interact, sort of like if you go to a party and you see an aristocrat and a laborer and see how they interact. Well, how are they going to react to a priest? And then when a cop walks in, you see how they interact and you learn about those people. You can discern their identities from their behaviors. Now, how does one draw upon these cards? Drawing styles are diverse. Some readers use all sorts of different layouts. Like on the left, you see the Celtic cross. That's a very common one. Some people use a 3-card draw. That's the one I do when I want to do one really fast. Some will just draw 1 card and interpret from that. I don't get very much off that. I use a 5-card draw, which you'll see me demonstrate in the video today, that I use quite a bit. Some are like 5 cards, some are 6 cards. One that I use, that I usually give to people for their birthday, is it's a 30-card setup that Aleister Crowley sets up in the Book of Thoth. But it takes me over an hour to do, and after it, I'm so drained. It is rough. It's hard on me. Okay, so what are the different uses that contemporary people use for tarot cards? Well, there's, of course, divination. So telling the future, diagnosing your fate, prescribing something that's going to happen to you. What I would say is more valuable is description and self-exploration, not telling the future, finding insights that readily occur due to the rich symbolism of the cards. Symbolisms that are laid on by generation after generations of artists, occultists, and interpreters. You may remember Jodorowsky said in one of our intro videos that if you are telling the future with cards and trying to tell someone else's future, you're a con man. There's no other way about it. You are scamming people. But if you're using the cards to help provide deeper insights, to tell stories, to access the unconscious, then you're using the cards intriguingly. And in fact, this is a big part of what Jodorowsky calls psychomagic or psychomagic, psychomagi, psychological magic, which is a system that he's developed readily and practices and demonstrates. So there have been there's lots of ways you can use the tarot for self-exploration, not telling the future. You find insights, and those readily come up from, as I said, the rich symbolism of the cards. Artists, quite a few of them, have described using the cards to get access for inspiration. You get access to your unconscious. Psychological therapists have deployed them in therapy, and Jodorowsky recommends that, but there are professional psychologists that do the same thing. So traditionally, what are these things? Well, there was an Italian card game called Tarocchi or Trifundi, and it had familiar playing cards that we know, and also the face cards. So like, 1 through 10, and then the court cards or the face cards. Now, remember that playing cards in general emerged from the Arabic world and came into the West. The 4 court cards are found in the tarot. So when you get to the court, instead of just having Jack, Queen, King, you have knight or page, knight, Queen, and King. So that's why you get more, you have 4 more cards than 52, which you have, 52 cards in the traditional playing card deck that we know. These lower arcana, the cards that correspond to those, there are 56 of in the tarot. All right, so there's 78 cards in total. And remember that contemporary playing cards have 52. So imagine you have a normal tarot deck of playing card, or a normal deck of playing cards, and and you have the trump cards as well. The trump cards are called the major arcana, the trifundi, the things that triumph. In fact, the game is called Trifundi, which means to triumph, and we get the word trump from trump in Italian. So these trump cards, which are these major arcana, I'll get to in a second, are 22 cards that are laid on top of your normal deck of cards that you'd be used to, 1 through 52. All right, so there are 56 cards that are called the minor arcana, the minor old things, and they correspond to our usual playing cards. They have clubs, they have hearts, they have spades, they have diamonds. Now, they have different names, such as amongst tarot, you have baton or batons and wands, which were originally, when the Arabs brought or transmitted the playing cards to the Western world, these were actually polo mallets, because polo was a big deal in the Arabic world. Yes, invented by the Arabs. Cups or chalices. Then you have swords and blades and coins and pentacles. So you can connect that to what we would have, king, queen, knight, page. And there we have, I had it all worked out. how they correspond. So, well, we don't need to go into that too far. Oh, one interesting thing, I met someone from Eastern Europe. I met a couple of people from Eastern Europe who does sort of tarot readings just using an ordinary deck of playing cards. And I believe it was a Ukrainian guy I met, and he said that he learned from his grandmother, who used a deck of playing cards that she'd used most of her life, which was a decommissioned, inactive deck from a Las Vegas casino. Made it all the way to the Ukraine, and she used them for divination. Okay, so when you're looking at these aspects in a tarot card reading, these lower cards are considered to be sort of transitory. It's like you're seeing fleeting influences if you're doing divination. Now, the trump cards are different. They tell the soul's journey from zero, which is the Fool, pure potentiality, to the world or universe, which is 21. So that is in 22 stages. These are called the major arcana. They reflect an allegorical journey, going back maybe even to alchemy and lead into gold, the transformation of lead into gold, man into God-man. Jodorowsky argues that they are a map of the soul, and Jodorowsky also says in another one of his movies that by studying the major arcana, you can understand a map to create your soul. Arguing that, in fact, the soul is something that you are not inherently born with, but needs to be created, or that it must be created in a more perfect manner than the way you have. I see this journey, this story that we've seen in a couple of the intro videos, as being a journey from unstructured potentiality to fully realized structured realizations. Some people have argued that the Fool, this first card, and we'll see it sooner or later, in one of these slides, might be what the Joker is modeled on in current decks. And it does have a symbolic similarity, but there's in fact no connection between Il Matto or Le Mat in French and in Italian, which is the Fool, and in fact the Joker. Okay, so we read a wonderful book. We read the first 2 chapters called A Wicked Deck of Cards by Decker and others. Now, they have a critique of the occult understanding of the cards, and I think they're dead on correct historically. We know, in fact, that playing cards entered Europe in the late 1300s, and the first tarot we have evidence of is in the 1400s, namely with the triumphs, so the trump cards, and here first there were 15. And triomphe becomes trump in English. They were hand-painted. Mass-produced versions came much, much, much later. Actually, in the very early 20th century, in the 20s, we saw some, and then they weren't really in print for a long time until the 1970s, when they, to some degree in the late 60s as well, when tarot cards start getting created again. Okay, so this occult interpretation, what I like how Decker lays it out and says there's an exoteric and an esoteric understanding of the symbolism of the cards. The exoteric would be that which you completely understand just by looking at it. It's what is at face value. The exoteric value of something would be, for instance, if you watch the movie The Big Lebowski. In fact, you watch The Big Lebowski and you just see a story. You just see a story and you enjoy it. On the other hand, you could see The Big Lebowski. In fact, there's a tarot deck based on it as the journey of the tarot through the trumps. The dude is obviously the Fool, and he works his way through these different stages, and he meets people in the courts and whatnot. And you can map it pretty well, the dude's journey until the end. Of course, the dude does not become, at the end of the movie, a fully realized person. Or maybe he does, because he's realized he just wants to be the pure potential that he always was all along. That would be the esoteric meaning. So exoteric meaning, that would be known to anybody who was playing the game. It would have a meaning based on the 15th century, the 1500s, and the Catholic Church. So you have like the Pope, the Devil, the Chariot, Justice, the Final Call, all sorts of stuff. Now, as soon as there really developed an audience for a more elaborate sort of understanding, an esoteric understanding of the tarot, well, of course, someone thought it up. Now, I would argue that most generally, magic, as soon as it sort of asserts something, will get excitable and it will evolve and expand. Just look at this incredible symbolism of this diagram on the right, which shows the tree of life the chakras, so the Catholic tree of life. You can see images from the I Ching. And what you're not seeing here is a lot of the numbers that are mapped on these little paths between these different pathways going up the tree of life, is that those are marked by tarot cards by number. Also, you'll notice that there are a bunch of swastikas on the top there. Why? Because before the Nazis, the swastika was an eternal and kind of long, pervasive holy symbol. In fact, the name swastika is a Sanskrit word, and you'll still see swastikas all over the place in India because they have been revered for thousands and thousands of years before the Nazis perverted the symbol. So there was a gentleman in the 19th century named Eliphas Levi. Well, he went by Eliphas Levi, but his name was Alphonse Louis Constant. And what he did was he integrated tarot into his magical doctrine. He was working on a system and establishing a system called ceremonial magic that took equivalencies of magical technologies and symbolisms from wide ranges of world religious systems, put them together, created new rituals, and those new rituals had a specific goal, which was to create knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel to transform you into the greatest version of yourself, your own full potentiality. And in time, this developed into an order called the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn used the same system along with varied occult technologies and a system of initiations to steadily teach you more and have you go through these revealed initiations, learning further and further mysteries that would lead you to the full realization of your true potential and your true nature of yourself. So before then, anybody thinking about ceremonial magic, there really weren't a lot. It was Levi. There was nobody that was really thinking about tarot magic. He put them together. How did he put them together? By mapping them onto the Kabbalah, a system of Jewish mysticism that, just to go very lightly, they understand a lot of symbolism and the very nature of the cosmos to be set up in 10 nodes, let's say 10 points that are found upon the cosmic tree of life. And the transitions between those points are what allows one to evolve and also to understand why one meets with cruelty or severity on one side of one's life and mercy on the other. And the whole of the cosmos and everything one encounters can be mapped onto this tree of life. And once it's mapped there, you can find ways to not only understand them better, but to manipulate them via magic. Okay, so Decker and our pals that wrote this, A Wicked Pack of Cards, are really dismissive of this occult interpretations. Now, you got to understand that occultists have changed the order and the symbols of the cards over time. I mean, what was 15 becomes 22. They differ and move the orders of the cards around. Aleister Crowley famously did this. So a lot of the cards we see now and the decks we see now do not map perfectly onto older versions of these cards and even the numbers of the cards. So scholars such as the ones we're reading today are interested in critique. Why? Because they're interested in historical truth and the sequence of reception. They're not interested in the evolution of religious lore, or maybe they are. We'll get to that in a second. So they're particularly irritated by the changing of the order of the trump cards to fit into the 22 characters of the Hebrew alphabet. But by that shift and switching around of the cards to 22 and the orders to map onto the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, and so forth, this shift connected the cards to the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. And that made the tarot so interesting because once they had that apparatus, then all of those, 56 lower cards that nobody knew what to do with. I mean, they had an idea of how to interpret this journey of the soul. What are you going to do with all those lower cards? Suddenly, once you put them on the Tree of Life, boom, you can do all sorts of stuff and interpret them in really exciting ways. So one thing I do think that's kind of funny is that these initial couple of chapters by Decker et al. Are really critical. But then the rest of the book, like the next 6 chapters, explain the different types of occult interpretations. So they established that the occult interpretations weren't there all along, but then they established that once they're set up, they go in all sorts of cool different directions. However, they seem to keep sighing, going, but this was just a card game in the first place. So maybe that's a problem with scholars, that they're just a little too materialist. I know there's a famous scholar right now named Jeffrey Kripal that says there is a great secret within the humanities, and that is that all our interpretations of culture, the world, and history are that everything's really depressing. And he wonders, and this is a question I've thought in my career, what would our examinations of the world look like if we looked for positive things instead of depressing things? What if instead of every time I look at a historical change, I look to see how human consciousness understands itself clearly and finds new positive ways of being human, instead of looking at the invisible hand of the marketplace or the drives of class and caste and sort of material drivers to all history. I actually think both aspects are valuable when thinking historically. So perhaps these authors themselves are performing a card trick. They're showing that there is no ancient precedence for this occult interpretation, but then they explain all these layers and accretions of errors, they would say, but those errors actually depict a really vibrant system of religious hermeneutics on the cards and their symbols. Hermeneutics from the god Hermes, finding equivalencies, understandings, and nuanced rereadings of scripture. Now, religious studies regularly makes this shift. We note that claims for anything being ancient are often not historically ancient, in fact, at all. Such claims, in fact, are a proclamation. And what do they proclaim? They proclaim that history, as they frame it, justifies the present. In other words, looking back in time at historical events, they try to justify those events based on a perspective now, or justify those historical events to justify how things are now, or to critique how things are now and say we should go back to that old way. So people would argue that the cards are ancient in order to make them more powerful. The cards are ancient, so the fresh, new, and innovative insights and artworks will be considered authoritative and powerful because they're old, even if they're not. Now, as an aside, what is at stake when, say, the Christians, when I was growing up in my church, always said that they were like the early Christian church and not like even the church of the early 20th century, and definitely not like the Catholic Church? Why would they argue that? Generally, they would say we are like the early Christian church because we are universal. We accept all people. We are anti-clerical. We're against ministers. In fact, we should all be really in the home. And we're really a little upset about being in a church right now and with a minister. They would argue that they are anti-Catholic. They are against the ritualism of the Catholic Church. They posit that innovative readings of the Christian Bible should be found by every person reading the Bible in their own language, not looking at a history of commentary or scholarship. They want to remove all strictures of authority and reveal a religion that is set for the individual to experience afresh and find their perfect own relationship with Jesus Christ on their own. What does that really sound like to me? That sounds like American individualism. So the question is, what came first? These notions of Christian Protestantism or the American context for them to come up? And if you travel around, you'll see Christianity looks really different in other spots of the world. All right, so further, what is going on with all these hyper male dude bros everywhere, it seems, who glorify Rome and Greece, that just want to live in the movie 300 for some reason, or in the movie Gladiator? I believe that they think their contemporary notions of often fractured masculinity would be well respected in ancient Greece or in Rome. In fact, the type of masculinity they would see in Greece or Rome, especially in Greece, would be quite different. It would definitely not be straight, and it would definitely not be as oriented toward, I don't know, physical strength in the same ways that our contemporary notions of masculinity are. In fact, we look at the Roman civilization, they were incredibly stratified with very few elites. So odds are, if you were living in Rome, you would not be fighting in glorious wars. You'd be cannon fodder in glorious wars, but most likely you would be a subsistence farmer who's being crushed by a brutal republic that extracted quite a bit from you. Remember, history's depressing. What about the Greeks of Sparta or Troy? What did we learn about Greek religion and masculinity when we looked in all of our magic texts? Does that look like what the hyper-masculine dude bro wants now? Nothing against the hyper-masculine dude bro, but it's just tiresome. because masculinity to me is this really vibrant thing, because I come from a different place. I come from a place where masculinity is about pushing through pain, service, humility. Anger, when used, has to be in service of protecting others. Care, also care for children, and supporting your family, not by providing for your family, but being engaged in your family. That's the type of masculinity that my father and the men that I grew up with fostered to me. Now they're not all good. There's all sorts of problems with the masculinity I grew up in. But I just want to say that the type of masculine idealism that is posited into the past is often a masculine ideal of the present. Why do all these men want to be gladiators so bad? Because they want to be gladiators in this world, not that they want to be ones in the past. They wouldn't have liked being ones in the past. Anyway, that's just an aside. Okay, all this is to say, so what? I mean, so what if it's not old? Magic innovates. Tarot innovates. Innovation is kind of great. This is a good and exciting thing. New versions of religions are good. It means we're learning more. It means we're expanding. So why do you have to ground every religious argument you have and say that it is exactly like it was a thing done in the past, or that it's contiguous with the thing in the past? So these claims are not as much lies as they are sort of myths, not history. They're making rhetorical statements to grant power and majesty to stuff they value by putting it in the past. Modern neo-paganism, as we're going to see soon, like Wicca or Druidry or Nordic neo-animism, heathenry and whatnot, looks nothing like the paganism or witchcraft of the past. In fact, Druidry was invented in the 1970s by American forestry professors. It looks nothing like the Druids as we have recorded in Latin by the Romans who were taking them over. Well, I mean, maybe some vague association with trees. I don't know. It's hard to say. Anyway, though modern neo-paganism or witchcraft doesn't look like what we see in the past, it claims to come from hoary antiquity. But so what? All that matters is that this stuff is effective, that it has utility. This is where I'm so postmodern. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's old. It just has to be good. So the occult interpretation that's being critiqued by Decker, but I don't think they're going far enough into it, says it comes out of the fact that there is no real tradition of using tarot, either as playing cards or otherwise, or divination or anything in English or the Spanish thinking world before World War II. That's it. Nuance that when you think about people saying you can't play cards based on card playing being illegal in the Bible because it's tarot. No. Card playing is listed with witchcraft in the Bible. No, it's about gambling. So a lot of issues which we read back and say, oh, we think tarot or witchcraft and witchcraft tarot is evil because it said so in the Bibles, we're reading back onto the Bible. In a sense, all the claims of the past are claims about the anyway, when people claim that the decks are old, these tarot systems are old, they're really claims to say they're important and they're effective. Now, there are many, many, many ways to interpret the minor and the major arcana and whatnot, but the most powerful and robust uses the Kabbalah, sorta. It's not exactly like what you see in Jewish Kabbalah, but it derives from it. So they map the faces of the cards onto the different aspects of the tree of life. Then they take the major, so you put all your minor arcana on the tree of life. And actually, we did see this here. Where is it? I have a video. I have it. Now I'm just making everybody sick. Sorry. One more time, real quick. I lost my super cool image. Oh, well, I'm sorry about that, students. All right, get dizzy. Have a seizure. Okay. Anyway, so how do people use these tarot cards in a magical practices? Often they'll internalize the imagery of the cards. Long-term practitioners will think about the cards and internalize them as symbols. They can shuffle through the cards, just shuffle through them and pull them out and whatnot, or lay them out. and use those to go on guided journeys. They're aided toward visualizations. The cards can be deployed like sigils that we've talked to before, or even used as symbols to banish or invoke deities. People also think through problems using tarot. I've sat and listened to people have whole conversations, be like, that guy's like a knight of hearts, or that, yeah, that guy's like a knight of wands, but his girlfriend is a princess of cups, and all of them are just so stuck in the four of discs. I mean, I've heard conversations like this. So the cards can also be used as amulets. It's a little trick I do. You'll pull out a card and you'll think about it. Sometimes that's your card of the day, and you'll use it to think about and interpret your day. Or you'll pull out a card that you think you need, like a value you have or a symbol that's important to you for your day, and you'll carry that with you. Some people I've seen charge the cards with magic, and then carry about, sort of radiate good luck off of them. I have seen some interesting communication. And in fact, there is a thinker named, right here. There's a thinker named Whitley Strieber, in fact, and he was the guy that wrote the book Communion, which is essentially the first alien abduction narrative that he wrote in the 80s. He describes communicating with the visitors, with beings from not necessarily another world, but another place, or not another planet, but another world, using the Marseille deck, in fact. Okay. All right, skilled occult tarot practitioner can use the tarot to interpret and expound on almost anything. It becomes a language and a world, but it's foremost a visual language. And I think that's really interesting, that you're thinking with images instead of thinking with words. Despite all of like the words that are laid atop the images, it's the symbols and the way the symbols work and the visual aspect of them that have meaning. It is more interesting to look at the tarot as an evolving system of ritual and magic and interpretation and language than the survival of some sort of ancient wisdom. Okay, we have two decks for our time. We have the Rider-Waite on the right and the Thoth on the left. And I want to talk about them really briefly before I close. So the Rider-Waite, and one interesting point, as you will see, both of these decks are the product of an occult author, male, and a practicing occultist artist who's female. So both of them that are named after their males, in many ways after their male, after the male authors that like kind of figured out the system. I would argue that the Thoth deck, particularly the one I like, is probably more influential to me based on the paintings of Lady Frida Harris. All right, so anyway, the Rider-Waite deck was written by a mystic named A.E. Waite, and it was illustrated by Pamela Colman Smith. Pamela Colman Smith, I would argue, is more important than A.E. Waite. Both were members of an organization called the Golden Dawn, which was an initiatory group of occult hermeticists that kind of come out of Eliphas Levi. Systems of initiation that you go through and learn progressive mysteries and trials and get progressive training through the way to fully realize yourself using occult technologies. Now, the deck, in fact, is published by the Rider Company. So it's the Rider-Waite deck, the Rider Company's deck, authored by Waite. Now, as I said, the Golden Dawn was using initiatory ritual and occult sciences such as alchemy, hermeticism, tarot, scrying, and astrology to realize the perfected self and bring about a change to the world in which there is more light in the world, that the world is more perfect, all of which is guided by either a secret group called the Secret Chiefs that are actually real beings, or disembodied beings that are guiding the occult revelations of secrets to a greater understanding of the world. Waite wrote a pictorial guide to the tarot that is still published today as a pamphlet with all of the decks that explains sort of the basic symbolism and the use for divination. Now, he and Coleman removed the overtly Catholic Church imagery, making it more universal, but also coding into the images much more intricate levels of meaning and expanding it, especially expanding it according to the Kabbalah. This was originally published from 1910 to 1939. Then it was revived and widely published in the 1970s after it went into public domain in the 1960s. This is the one you see all the time, the one you see in TV, the one that you encounter. Generally, if you meet somebody who's reading tarot, they're reading this one. This is the tarot that your aunt has. This is the tarot that you'll find in the bookstore. Now, the Thoth is a little bit different, but I did want to know, one final thing I wanted to notice is The Thoth and the Rider-Waite and tarot in general gets big in the late 60s when you have the counterculture. You have an established culture that is sort of pro-war, pro-rah-rah-rah US, not civil rights, not anti-war, anti-love, not pro-love. That's the counterculture. So tarot comes up in both of these decks with the rise of the counterculture. So between 1938 and 1943, the Thoth deck was created. Aleister Crowley, who was the occultist, consulted with an artist named Lady Frida Harris, peace be upon her, to develop the symbols and images in the Thoth tarot. Crowley had a falling out with the Golden Dawn originally and started doing his own thing. Now, he loved bad press, Crowley did, throughout his life. So when he was called the most wicked man in the world, he leaned into it. That might have hurt his legacy a bit. In fact, I would argue he is the most sophisticated occult synthesizer or even religious thinker in the 20th century. He even claimed himself to be an incarnation of who? Eliphas Levi, that guy I talked about that first connected tarot to ceremonial magic. Crowley connects the tarot to the Egyptian deity Thoth, engaging more in this notion that it all goes back to the Egyptian lore, which it does not. Now, in 1944, Crowley published his book about the tarot, the Book of Thoth, and it had, illustrations and it had pictures of the deck, but the deck wasn't really easily available. In fact, the deck wasn't available at all to purchase until the 1970s, when members of his religious order that persisted after his death, called the OTO, were able to get it published. However, they had a lot of trouble maintaining their copyright control. Arguably, and I've heard people argue this extensively, the publication of the deck was funded through revenue generated by LSD dealing in the 1970s. And while this was a big part of it, it wasn't all of it. There are a lot of people involved in putting their time and money into seeing this very important deck published. The Thoth deck by far is the most visually striking, grander than any of the new or beautiful tarot art interpretations. It knocks the kitty cat, it knocks the tarot of the moon garden on its butt. It's just really striking and beautiful. And once you look at the Thoth and even look at the Rider-Waite, you'll start seeing its symbolism in places you wouldn't expect. The nice thing about this deck is it's easy to use once you learn the symbolism, and it's inexpensive. Now, Crowley's Book of Thoth, which was written at the end of his life, I would argue is one of the most interesting and extensive works on syncretic religious and occult symbolism that I've ever read. So the cool thing about the Book of Thoth is you can learn it all. You can learn it all. I mean, there's Greek stuff. There's actually Sanskrit stuff. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong. In the Book of Thoth, you can see all of these incredible different cultural strands on magic put together in an interesting way that doesn't feel like it's just being consumed and pooped out like cultural appropriation. Now, some people avoid the Thoth deck. They say it's too powerful. They say it's too striking. They say Crowley's too bad of a guy. Like I said, one dude at the occult bookstore is like, oh no, I don't mess with the Thoth deck. I use the tarot of the moon garden because the Thoth deck is too dangerous. I don't know if it's all that dangerous, but it is striking. The symbolism is striking. The cool thing about the Thoth deck is it pulls together so much, you can learn a lot of things by studying the deck. Now, in this way, this trifling card game from Italy and France that, got shipped in from a different card game from the Arabic people before the Europeans encountered it, has become a powerful occult technology. I know one occultist argued, who was it? I can't remember right now. It might have been Israel Regardi, argued that a prisoner who was locked away in isolation could, with just the tarot to study in the years of isolation, attain universal knowledge. That's a pretty exciting claim, that through just the tarot, you could learn all the secrets, that all the wisdoms of the universe is just in these X many cards. So what's our takeaways? Tarot cards and decks today are based on much older card game cards. They were gaming cards that these are originally based on. Now, the exoteric cards, so the exoteric, the clear meaning for the game and the meanings that are about, the Catholic Church and the biblical cosmos in the 1500s, in fact, gain an esoteric or secret reading. And when that happens, it facilitates occult wisdom, or divination. But honestly, if you're really saying that your tarot tells the future, you're just scamming people and ripping them off. Cartomancy, or telling the future with cards, and tarot used for divination only arises in the mid-20th century. So that ain't that old at all. The Thoth and the Rider-Waite are the most popular among contemporary users. Both were a collaboration between a male and a male occult author and a female occultist artist. And both texts argue that they are a new revelation for our time, fit for an era that is different from the ones come beforehand. The one thing about a lot of these groups, like the Golden Dawn, it's called the Golden Dawn, there's a lot of potential, or Thelema, which means will in Greek, and the organization associated with that is the OTO that was started by Aleister Crowley, is they have a very positive view of the future. While we may be afraid and see conflict and see global warming and see political strife just on the horizon, constant and dismal, they would argue that we have gone from the era of the mothers, when we were goddess worshiping proto-agriculturalists, to the fathers, agriculturalists, city living, dominance of the church, to the era of the child, where nowadays we, living in the era of the child that started in the 20th century, is a time where the mysteries are realizable and where we are always growing, that we are not dominated by the mothers or the fathers, but we are the child, fully able to realize ourselves, our place in the universe, and harmony with the universe, the powers of the universe, and between people. So that's a remarkably positive outlook. And for me, who grew up thinking that Jesus Christ was coming back any minute and the world was going to be destroyed, and then we'd go to an abstract heaven that actually sounded kind of scary when I really thought about it, I'll take the occult worldview. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.